Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at Exo's mid-range Portalcraft. So this was up on the Shadowverse website, you can find it there. I will leave a link to that in the description below where he goes over a full article and summary of the deck. But after playing it a little bit, I can definitely say it's got some power to it. I've had quite a good time with it. I mean, Desex isn't even required to absolutely win, it is just really helpful. I mean, it's quite easy to just curve out, swarm the board, fill your hand, stock up, use things like Otherworld Rift to deal with big threats, and use other cards to draw. I found, the few cards I wasn't too happy with, Hamlin and Hakarabi, are actually half decent in this deck, in this setup, just because Portal is so reliant on certain cards, so that you're not flooding your hand. So the one of Ironforge is actually a perfect kind of one of. The double Saphira and double Spinaria I think is fine. As long as you're careful not to discard both your Saphiras too early, you would be right. You probably want to be sending them back to your deck if they're in your opening hand and aim for a lot of these low end stuff. Biofabrication as a one-off is also really good, being able to lower the cost of a card in your hand and then put more back in, which basically can guarantee you play point gain, which is awesome. Other than that, everything else is pretty standard Portal stuff. You want to be able to just, play cards, slowly fill your deck, not overfill your deck in the early turns. You don't want to completely stack your deck unless you already have Desex in hand. Otherwise, you just want to kind of play off it and just continue to stock the board. So we'll get right into some games and check it out. So first up, we're going to versing Dragon. Then we have a couple of Shadow matches to follow that up. Dragon is not too bad a match for this so far, from what I've played.
This one's for my family.
Hamlin is, I would say, an average 2-drop. I still a little iffy on it as a card, but in this variant of deck, it is pretty important just so you have those extra plays. And getting it out on 2 against certain matchups like Dragon isn't actually half bad because you're not going to be losing much tempo in that regard. You're not going to be losing much by playing the Hamlet to stock your hand up. Plus, being able to multiply those machine soldiers I found very important. I found it more important than multiplying most of my other cards, just because being able to control your resonance is that important to this deck. So we get the pretty good trade there. Pure Hearted does get the drop. And of course, solid wards. I always find this card very important. Iron Staff Mechanic. Being able to drop a ward onto board and then also using the artifact wards later on, especially when comboed with Excel, can be quite important to the deck. So we actually start off fairly well. We do get to drop Cat Cannoneer basically for free. Could have dropped Lion, but I really want to be able to use that in the next turn, turn 5, to combo with one of these 3 drops in the worst case situation. Of course, Draconic Fervor. And since we basically have a free turn 5, I mean, we can set up more Magic Line, we can set up more Fervent, we can go into whatever we want. And then we've still got the Hakarabi, we've got the Otherworld, we've got the Dimension. Otherworld is great for Dragon, just because dealing with big threats is difficult normally. So being able to use Otherworld to clear stuff is really great. Your main kind of win condition is the Saphira. If you can boost up your artifacts to play them and get a few bit of chip damage in, like I'm trying to do here, usually you can survive quite effectively, even without Desex. And of course, I always find the Icarus Evolves are more important than any other Evolve card in this deck, just because getting those artifacts to your hand as a tutor card is so good. Although in the mid to late game I would focus more on using them to clear, over just trying to draw. So Rahab, really difficult body to get rid of most of the time. 4/7 is usually an absolute pain, but not impossible to deal with, especially since we do have Dimensional Cut, which is a pretty crazy card. But this is what I like. Once you have Excel in hand, even without having Desex, you can actually get a fair few artifacts off most of these artifact draw cards, which means you can pretty much stack your deck up. So as long as you've got a little bit of draw power, you should normally be fine. And this situation is actually good. I mean, them not evolving and trading here really leaves them open to being basically just rammed with a 3-1. We can also set up our Mystic Artifact for our draw. We're going to gain back a play point for it, so we're only really spending 2 on it. And that allows us to drop Otherworldly Rift. I probably should have honestly saved it, but since I drew a second one, I'm not too concerned. and I'm able to push the 5 damage to put them at 9 which, with how many artifacts we've had destroyed, should make Saphira almost lethal. I actually believe it's very, very close to lethal. I believe we can check. Yeah! Sorry, no, it's only at 1, because I only destroyed, didn't I? But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on hand. They don't even matter because they're going to cost 0. So that's pretty good. We've got another Otherworld, which is a good way to remove this Zeus. And we can use these other things to trade. So with that setup, we should be able to get Saphira up to probably about 6 or 7 by next turn, quite quickly. So then it would just be a matter of using our draw power as well, so that we can get more artifacts and just absolutely dominate them. So we didn't end up needing the Otherworld, which is good. So get the easy trade. I can decide to drop the Otherworld here or not. It's just a matter of, do I want to get rid of this 4/4 now, or do I want to just stack up artifacts? And looking at where Saphira's at, stacking artifacts is probably the better of the two options. Especially since I can play both artifacts out immediately. So that puts Saphira at 6, plus those is 8, so they will literally be 1 damage from lethal. Which is exactly where you want them to be. Well, you prefer them in lethal, but this is close enough. Not so lucky. Do decide to do this trade first in case I draw into an artifact, because if I do, I can actually win. Otherwise, Otherworld's my only decent option, and I've just kind of got to stack the board again while I wait. If I had have realised I didn't have any artifacts in my deck, which unfortunately they don't give you an artifact counter for stuff, then I probably would have used Otherworld Afterlife. Just so I didn't need to worry about it. Because now I'm in a little bit of a difficult spot because I don't actually have any artifacts on hand and I still need to deal that 5 damage through this ward. Luckily, since they weren't able to remove anything else, we're actually going to be able to use this beast to trade and then use the 6 damage on board for lethal. 8 if we wanted to evolve. Which is enough to clear this dragon.
You're a solid fighter.
Next up, Shadow, which I did mention at the start. We've got a couple of Shadow games to follow up that dragon game.
Activate. Enhance. Fire.
Shadow's a, I would say, reasonable matchup with this deck so far, at least from the testing I've done. Exo has a much better breakdown in his article of the matchups and what you want, so I do highly recommend checking that out if you haven't, just because that sort of thing is really important to know. But for me personally, I found Shadow to be an okay match. Fortunately, no good drops, like for the early game, like you can't drop Excel on 1, which sucks. Having to trade a Mecha Wing into this 2/2 doesn't feel great. I didn't go with the Icarus because I do want to use that as a tutor later, so I normally hold Icarus if I have another 2-drop. And because I don't really need to force out Icarus a lot of the time, I can just kind of play it with no real consequence. Luckily, we do manage to draw into an artifact straight off the top, which is really surprising, so Excel actually gets some value, which does allow me to drop the Icarus now, which I think is reasonable since they don't now have a way to deal with Icarus immediately, and our follow-up turn is our Evolve turn. Then we've got the Iron Staff Mechanic, which is just crazy card, honestly. I love their wards, I love that it's got draw power in it, and 2/3 stat line with like Rush with the Excel on board is absolutely crazy to play. So we don't see much more here. I mean, they've got a pretty good board. All I can really do is use these artifacts, burst them down a bit, set up my own ward to block out any major damage, and then go for 6 to face. Which is how I usually like to play this, and leave myself in Resonance is also pretty reasonable, because if we do want to play the Hakarabi on 5, we're going to want to be able to go back into Resonance, I think, or maybe not. I'm not sure how I want to handle that next turn. And we've got the Spinaria though, so even without the Des, we've actually got a way to deal with small pings. Unfortunately, they do go for the full clear, making my life a little difficult. But Spin's going to do the job. Once we use an Evolve on Spinaria, it's going to clear the 4/4, then we can leave the ping up and just ping it off. It'll also make sure that we're able to control our Resonance pretty reasonably. I mean, next turn if they kill it, we do get to draw, which is great. Fortunately, didn't hit the 2/1, which is what I really wanted to hit with that ping. But I'll settle for this. Plus, the more artifacts I can throw onto board, the better Saphira gets, so that's going to be kind of the only way to actually close this match now. I've just got to kind of survive while at the same time boosting up the Synthetic Beast to really drop it hard on the board. So we're going to turn 6. We did draw into Hamlin, which is fine. I can deal with Hamlin a little bit here. I just really needed something to go off on it, and I think since we do have some artifact draw power plus Hamlin could actually work. We don't really have much to do this turn though. So we shouldn't be too far off lethal here with this. I mean, it's at 4. We can pretty much spam artifacts from here as long as we can get them into our hand, which isn't impossible. And most of my artifacts will be considerably good at clearing stuff because they are ancient artifacts. I do decide to take the Hamlin because I want to stock next turn. Being able to get double ancient artifacts is going to be more valuable to me. And I could deal with most of these skeletons. I mean, worst case is Hector here, just because if they do use a trade and then Hector, it's going to mean I have to deal with a massive board. But Swan, also not a great one for me. They are going to get a full clear, which isn't good for me at all. But I should be able to deal with this. I really just need to keep my health like good and before turn 10. So we stock the deck with more ancient artifacts because ancient artifacts are awesome. The best thing about this is, now that I've done that, I can actually use the ancient artifact and these analyzing and other ancient artifact and literally just swarm the board with them. Which I could have done before, but I really wanted more ancients in the deck for a comboing later. So 4 or more artifacts to add to the Synthetic Beast count when they die will put the Synthetic Beast at 8, which is most of the health of our opponent here. And we are very close to being in a playable range of that. Plus, they are forced to deal with this entire board now. Which they can do, because I mean, getting that free banish and dealing with spin using the 6/5 is really, really good. But I do have a draw, or 2 draws here, so the odds of me getting something I need is actually reasonably high, especially now that I've drawn Mystic Artifacts of all things. Do go with the Cat Cannoneer first though, because I can put more Ancients in the deck. I can then rush that in after I've tried to draw more cards. And Otherworldly Rift, that will actually come in really handy if we come up against something difficult to deal with. So we do get to trade it, which is what I wanted. We've also now set up these double wards, which I love the animated one. It does look amazing. And with that, I think we will be very, very close with the artifact deaths to having Saphira be playable. Not quite enough, but if we can take advantage of Otherworldly Rift and maybe even the ward here, it should be enough for us to actually set up lethal on them next turn. Provided we don't die ourselves, but I think in that regard we should be okay. And since I drew that ancient artifact, much better off just ramming them. We have more than enough to set up lethal here. And now all we have to defend against is Aisha. They do have 1 card, so as long as we're defending against that, we can actually survive, because they're only going to be able to attack twice, which means they can only deal 5, and we're actually 1 out of range of that. So really happy with how this hand ended up turning out. It was a little bit of luck, but as we pretty much secured lethal from last turn, which is what you want to do with this deck, 1 or 2 turns in advance, for an exact lethal of 12. And our final matchup, which is also a shadow game. I know this is a longer video, but some of these are going to be quite long because the new meta is quite slow. And I still want to include at least 3 games so I can show a few different variations of playstyle. Plus, those last 2 games we didn't have Des Ex at all. We won both our games without Des Ex without much issue. That's pretty normal for this deck so far that I've noticed. I mean, Des Ex isn't required if you know what you're doing with a Portalcraft deck. You can usually just play off them until you can survive. Of course, big combos are going to kill you quite quickly. I mean, you're dead to a Dread Scene if you don't have Des Ex earlier. It's really difficult to recover from that. You're also dead to an Aisha unless you have a setup like last game where you can actually defend off that one important turn and lethal in the following turn. which isn't too difficult to do, it just requires a little bit of planning in advance. So this game though, we do have Desex, which is why I wanted to showcase this as my third game, because Desex does definitely speed up the deck and make it a lot easier for you to dominate your opponent. Which is fairly important, I would think. Like, being able to dominate them is great. It definitely takes practice to get good at Portal. I've played a lot of Portal. I haven't won a lot of Portal, but I've definitely played plenty. And I have a good grasp on the concept from other card games. They use very similar mechanic styles. And now that we've found a couple of, I think a couple of decks around that have decent Portal numbers for cards in your deck, especially this mid-range Exos one is great in this current meta, I think. It's really quite stable, at least from what I've used it as so far. They do leave up the 3-1, which to me seemed a little odd. I probably would have just dealt with the 3-1 straight out, but I'm guessing they wanted to use this 2-1 here instead so they could get the extra draw power. But that's also going to be really difficult for them, because now I can just free evolve that 3-1, deal 5 damage to their face, which, as I mentioned with Portal, getting that damage in early really makes a huge difference to how easy it is to lethal in the mid to late game. Being able to deal that damage and put them to 8, it's going to hurt when a beast comes down later on. And I did also make sure to set up myself for Resonance next turn. If you notice with the 2-3, draw a card, I made sure that next turn will be in Resonance, so I can drop Desex, which will just absolutely cream this board. That way I can sacrifice this whole hand and aim for a beast early, while also getting more artifacts, hopefully, that I can take advantage of. I do decide to go for the 4 damage to face, because I'm not worried about them playing anything on turn 6. I mean, Skelly Prince is probably the worst thing they could drop on 6 on me, and that's no real threat at 19 health, so better off just pushing the board. And they do drop the Skeleton Prince, but as I mentioned, not really going to be useful for them. They're still not going to be able to trade with everything here very well, and clearly not, so that gives us lethal. And so that sums up Exo's mid-range Portal deck. Obviously, like I said, I recommend checking out his article for a full in-depth view. This was just my experience with the deck, so it may not be perfect, but I found it to be great. Right from the get-go, starting with Portal, I thought it'd be a great deck to play, definitely fun. Wasn't sure quite where it would fit into the meta, whether it would be a decent deck or a very average deck. But after playing this one in particular and my previous Portal deck, I've got to say these decks are so solid. Once you have learnt to play and you can get a few turns ahead on predictions and planning, usually you can close out games fairly easily without much issue. Of course, there's always going to be a little bit of risk because those combo cards will just absolutely decimate you in a single turn, which you just can't avoid as Portal because you don't really have a decent way to block them out, excluding the Iron Staff mechanic and those warded artifacts. But other than that, solid. I'd give it an easy 9 out of 10 on the, deck scale, I guess. And I really hope you enjoyed it. So you'll find the deck list in the description below. Again, check out the article, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.